My name's Julie Thoreen, and I am a part of Lucid Day, and we're a Monday.com partner that works with companies that are like yourselves, teams, businesses, to set up and get the most out of Monday. We care deeply about using Monday to enable effective teamwork because it can be used in that way. And we really feel as a company that effective teamwork is what drives business, because it keeps your team happy, it keeps your bottom line happy, it makes people more productive. Teamwork is really the key, and Monday, when set up correctly, can really be used in that way for powerful things. So before we get started, I'd love to know some of the main pain points that you might be dealing with your team. Just a quick, like 1 or 2 words, things that you're struggling with Monday, or that they're having trouble adopting. I would love to know those things. Of course, I have a list of things myself, so if you don't want to share, that's fine too, but it's always good to hear who in the room has what issues, and maybe there are some common things. Awesome. Zara says, my team isn't used to looking in Monday and updating their statuses. Yes, that is a huge pain point. Raquel says, it feels like more work to set up Monday and follow up with status updates. I totally understand that as well. Those are the status and the communication updating tasks. It seems like it would be just like a simple thing, but it actually ends up being a much more complicated thing. So we'll definitely be looking at that today. Awesome. All right, we'll go ahead and get rolling. So to start, one of the teams that we worked with at Foundry 10, which is an organization that works with youth in various educational settings, they were wanting Monday to really streamline their data collection. And it's such a good example of how to use Monday to set up as your team. We often work with the super user. So many of you might be the super user, like the director, the team lead, the manager. And there are certain things that you need, but certain things that the team doesn't need to worry about. And our contact at Foundry 10 was so good at working with Lucid Day to make sure that what we were setting up in Monday was exactly what would work for the team so that they would use it. And it involves streamlining how we set up the boards and using Monday forms. That was like the key to success, was using Monday forms, because it took away some of the complexity of Monday, of someone going in and having to figure out what's the status column, and they could just look at this form and it dumped into Monday. It was exactly what they needed, and it fit the team so that the friction was less, and they got that data collection system up and running much easier. And so really what we want to look at is creating good structure versus bad structure based on your team. And I'm going to show you a little bit in Monday here. So hopefully you can all see my screen. We've got a bad structure. It's not bad in and of itself, but it's bad from a team perspective. So this is a sort of a typical project management board. We've got our item name. And the first thing that you might notice on here is that we have a lot of columns going on. Scroll, 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 lots and lots of columns. Nothing wrong with that. These may be columns that you very well need for your own purposes, but from a team's perspective, there's a lot going on. And when I come in here, I'm already not wanting to learn a new system. And so when I come in here, all I can see is how much there is, and I get overwhelmed and I don't want to use the system. So making sure that people can see only what they need to see and can edit only what they need to edit are really important things. And you'll see that here on our good structure. We've got our columns with our permissions that restrict, which you can do in the settings. We'll talk more about this in just a moment. You can either restrict them from view or from edit. So that's a really great way to make it so that they're not editing or seeing things, again, making it easier for them. Some other things that you notice on here, again, how many columns we've got going on. These are columns that I need as a manager, the team doesn't need. So I can utilize views to limit what they can see. So these are only the columns that they need. few other things you might notice on this board, we've got some redundancies. We have planned effort, effort spent, and then time tracking. The team might, what am I supposed to do? The time tracking, or do I manually put in effort spent? I don't understand. It's too much information. And so we reduce the columns, we streamline and really figure out what it is that we need. All we need is the time tracking. We get rid of that other column. So we're reducing and streamlining the number of columns that we have. And finally, we can even use something like a form to make this even easier. So taking something that is a fine structure for you, but not so much for the team, and making it into a good structure. And the first place to start with that really is the conversation of negotiables versus non-negotiables. So what are the things that you need to have on your board, the non-negotiables? These are the things, for example, that are areas of accountability. These may be, for example, something that you need to show your superiors, like time tracking is needed for billable purposes, not a negotiable. Or maybe for the leadership team, you have to give a certain weekly status report. So those status labels are very important because they are needing to be given to the leadership team, a non-negotiable. Or maybe, for example, there's a specific way your business does file versioning. They have a specific DAM or something of the sort, and that's just not a negotiable piece. So these are non-negotiable, and they really require building that trust with your team so that you can ask them to remain accountable to these pieces. And the way to do that is to really look at the negotiables. So what are the areas that can be negotiable so that you can build trust, you can build ownership with the team, and they also have some say in how things are built, and they feel like their voices were heard. These are all things that help not just to build that trust for accountability, but also to reduce friction. So when they start using it, there's like, oh yeah, I was a part of this, and I understand why we did the things that we did. And there's just that ownership piece, which is really important for getting buy-in. And those things, for example, like status labels, asking them to help you decide which status labels to create. So if you have an approval process and things are going back and forth, maybe to different teams, getting on the same page with your team on what the status label should be, what the verbiage should be, the colors. It's actually an incredibly challenging conversation to have. It's ideological and people have opinions about it, but it's very important to get on the same page and to make sure everyone agrees, yes, these are the status labels that we want and they make sense to us and we get why we're using these. It's going to make them more likely to actually use them instead of just bypass them because either they don't understand why they're there or they just don't really have that connection to them, so they just don't use them. Or maybe, for example, you ask them to help with the naming convention or the structure, say, of the groups, or maybe the items. There's naming convention is a really important thing to get on the same page about. So making sure that everyone understands the naming convention or the structure of the board, it makes sense to them. Or maybe, for example, communication. This is what you all were talking about, is communication is important to determine as a team. Okay, how are we going to communicate when something's done, when something's ready for the next person, when something is stuck? And there are a lot of ways to do this in Monday, or are we using Slack, or are we texting people, or what's the way? Let's just decide it and then we'll go forward from there. So these are all spaces of negotiables that are important to get your team buy-in as early as possible so that your team actually uses Monday. And now let's look at some questions to ask. If you're in this space right now, you've kind of gone through, determine your non-negotiables, determine some negotiables where you could get that buy-in from the team. Now we can start looking at the questions to ask. And when we work with teams, these are questions that we also ask. What are the negotiables? What are the non-negotiables? And then even if you're not in Monday yet, what is your team doing now? So current state. How do they communicate the status of tasks? If you're in Monday and they're not using the system you set up, how are they communicating that? Are they using Slack? Are they using the updates but not tagging people? So trying to determine what they're doing will help to determine the future state. How are they asking for help? Are they emailing you every time they need help? Are they not asking for help until the very last minute? How are they or you assigning tasks? This is something that we don't often think about. Are people assigning tasks by sending a message in Slack or an email? Hey, can you do this? Instead of using Monday to assign a task and a person, or is somebody using Monday to assign a task to a person, but they're not adding a due date. It's not notifying that person. It never shows up in their My Work. So that's a really important thing to determine. How are you assigning tasks? How are you sharing files and information? What are they doing now? That's the current state. And then their current pain points is part of that. So in Monday, it's a very enlightening conversation to sit down with your team. And maybe you've already done this and ask what their pain points are in Monday. What do they not like? What's causing friction in their work? And then what about outside of, for example, they're tired of having a ton of systems. They want to have that streamlined, or they feel like people are assigning tasks to them in multiple different spaces, not just Monday, but also Slack, also email, also phone calls. That's very overwhelming, and that's a true pain point. So trying to determine the current state, and that includes the current pain points, is very important to look at sort of future state, what we can solve using Monday. So what I want to do is actually go back to that bad structure board and compare it to the good structure board. We're going to dive a little deeper into some of those features and look at what's going on there. Please ask questions as we're going, and put questions in the Q&A as you have them pertaining to your own team if I don't cover them. So let's navigate back to our bad structure board. And let's look at our good structure. So the first thing that's important to go over is the views. So up here at the top, we have the ability to add views. And the table view is, I think, one of the most powerful views in Monday, because it allows us to create a customized view for your team. In this case, it's called the collaboration view. And I'll just create one really quick so you can see, and we'll call this team view. Within a view, I have so many options. I'm able to, first of all, hide columns that don't pertain to my team. So when I click on this, if I click on all columns, I don't have to do that, but it's a little bit faster. Then I can select owner. That's very important. Status, I want them to update that. They don't need to see the baseline. That's for me. So just the timeline, and also that planned, spent, and time tracking. That's important information for them to know. How much time should they plan on spending? How much time have they spent, so they can time track and plan how much time they have left. So after that, I'm going to go to save to this view. And now, unless someone changes those, it's always going to be saved to that. So if I go from main table to team view, always saved. A few other things that are saved within a view are the column order. So if I think that my team would like to see this time tracking first, I can move it closer to the status so that they don't have to see as much. So once I do that, it's locked in. I can always move it locked in the view. If I go back to the main table, you'll see it's all the way over there. It's only on the view that column movement makes a difference. A few other things I can do in here is create filters. So for example, right now I'm seeing a lot of done items. I can click on either my advanced filter, which is to the right here, or my quick filter. So it just depends on which you prefer. This is a more visual look. I prefer the advanced filter, which is that little arrow. So I only want to see where the status is not done. This is a working view. People don't need to see when something is done. They don't need to see it. I can save to this view, and forever and for always, this is only going to show things that are not done. Maybe I also want to see only things that are assigned to the particular team member. So I can add a new filter where also the owner is me dynamic. Me dynamic means whoever account this is, it's going to show their tasks. This is super helpful if your team is complaining that they just see too many tasks, or if you're having to create a team member view for every single member of your team. That's too much work. It's a lot of maintenance. This is a much easier way to get a streamlined view of anything that's assigned to me. That is the view. And you can even add things like conditional coloring. Like, let's say I wanted to add it to be red, where the timeline starts after today, or ends before today. This is going to show me some late tasks. And when I save to the view, it's going to show me that red line, which I'll show you, I guess, using this just so you can see what it looks like. Now you can see on the cell it's coloring it. I can even do it on the row. So again, you're making things meaningful, you're making things streamlined for your group. And that's the table view. It's very powerful. So one quick note with something like dynamic filters, this would not be good for you if you're a team that passes things off. Let's take that communication example from before. Let's say you're a team that I'm assigned to activity 1 and Jalen's assigned to activity 2. And when I'm done with activity 1, I want to be able to tell Jalen, that's how we've decided as a team, hey, this task is ready for you now. And we've decided as a team, I'm going to do that in the conversations. So that's a passing of the baton. If I have this team view up that's dynamically filtered, I don't see Jalen's tasks. So that's something to consider when you decide how you communicate the passing off or the communication piece. You may not want that dynamic filter. So these are some things to consider as you're building this for your team. Can you set up multiple team views for different service lines? So if a team is only associated with a particular service, then okay, yeah, so video design, etc. So yes, you can do that. And there's a number of ways. Let's say, for example, again, this kind of comes down to board structure. If you know that your team wants to see their view by service or by team, so video only wants to see video, design wants to see design, then we can think about how we want to structure this board. One way we might structure it is by making the groups the types of service. So let's just say this is video, and let's say this is design. Now I can create a filtered view where my group is video, and I can rename this video team. That's one way to do that. But let's say you don't want to do that. It's phases of the process, and it's going to stay that way. The groups don't get their own, the teams don't get their own group. Then that way we need to give Monday some kind of identifier to let them know this is a video task, this is a team task. And there's a few ways to do that. We could create a label. Some of you, just as a quick side note, you may be asking, my Monday doesn't look exactly like this. And that's because I'm in the new board experience. If you would like to engage that, which I would recommend, it's coming out to everyone soon. You can go to your avatar down at the bottom, monday.labs, and click on at the bottom, open board experience experiment. If you want to see this, it's just looks a little different. There's a few added bonuses like the label column that I'm just going to show you now. If you activate it and you hate it, close board experience experiment, we'll close it. So you get the old view again. So you have a label column that you can put in here. This is the status column. It's just named something differently to kind of clarify. So I could put in here, video, design, and media. And now, instead of using the group to filter, I can filter by the team. So I can choose now where the team is video. Oops, I didn't put anything in there. Let's try that again. I'll do it this way. So this one's video, this one's video. And now when I filter, it's going to show just those video tasks. So this would be another way. This is a column that your team probably doesn't need to see. It's backend. You could hide it so that they don't see it, because it's really just for you. That's another way to do it. Another way that you could explore is within the item name itself. So for example, if you, let's make this a little bigger. If in writing the item name, you put, video in the name, you can filter where the name contains video. And now that's going to filter out in the same exact way. So essentially, it's the same concept. You want to create an identifier for Monday to grab to be able to filter out particular things. And there's one more way I'll show you, and that's by creating teams in Monday. So you could have a column, a people column here that's called team instead of using the status label. And you can set up teams. Right now I have some teams set up down here. So I've got a design team set up, and in this design team is everyone who's a part of the design team at my company. So this, the same thing. So I would filter where the team people column is design. That's going to get me that same exact thing. If you're wondering, well, where the heck do I find that? You go down to your avatar and you'll see right up here, teams. And here you can create teams. You can add people to the teams. You can invite members, manage users. And once you add people to that team, they'll be in it until you remove them. So it's a great way to streamline it. So only the team that you want is assigned to that item. Eli, I'm glad that's amazing. I also think it's amazing. Great. Raquel is saying, I really need to know how to get started before I set up the view. That's a great question. So how do you get started? I would say, and I try to recommend, we all do, that you first get started off of Monday. So again, asking those questions, what are the negotiables, and then what are the non-negotiables, the pieces of information I need to have, and what are the things that I'd like to have, or, could have that team input. And then looking at how your team is currently doing things and how you'd like for them to do them. That's just good information for you to know before you get started. And then there are a few ways that you can get started. One, in your Monday, going to plus add, you can add a new board from scratch. This is just kind of a general playground. I'll just add it so you can see what it looks like, and you can just start playing around with what you think the right structure might be for your groups, for your columns. Another great way to start is through the templates. There are a lot of really great templates in Monday, and I consider them as extremely good jumping off points. Because Monday is so customizable, nothing's going to fit your workflow exactly, but it's a great place to start to get some ideas, to maybe customize something a little bit and look to see, what might work for your team, and then start with that. And the third way would be to import from an existing spreadsheet. This is a great way to also get started. If you're using Google Sheets or Excel, you can import your spreadsheet and you have your columns in there and kind of go from there. So hopefully that was helpful for that. All right, Eli asked a great question. Our teams use completely different columns and we're having trouble mining boards for high-level information for leadership to digest. Yeah, that's a great question, or it's a pain point that a lot of people have. And there's a few ways to do that. So one thing that we would recommend is, first of all, making sure that your boards have all the columns that you might need for that information for leadership. Making sure that across your boards, your status labels are the exact same color and wording. We don't consider that. It's so important for our human brains when you're looking at something from a high level to see the same color and the same word. Even if some of your boards have the dark color green for done, I have no idea why it's just not changing the color. There we go. Say that has a light color green for done, or this one says completed. Even though it's a small change like that, it's still green and it's still kind of done. From a high level perspective, it becomes very muddy because it's like, well, which green, what are all these colors? What do they mean? So making sure that the colors are the same, that the messaging is the same is a really important thing to make sure you get on the same page. And if you haven't explored within your admin, you can actually set these under customization boards. You can sort and rename your default board labels. So when you create a status label, you can make sure that it always is the colors that you've determined. If you want something to show up in here, but you don't have a label for it, just do something like a hyphen and it will show up. This is a great way, again, to streamline your status labels for the high level. Another thing which we can't get in too much today is looking at how you connect to a high level. So there are a few ways to do that. And Eli, I would direct you to our last webinar, which is up on YouTube, that talks about the different ways to break up your Monday board. And it shows, we go through this workspace here, and it goes through like having a high level board and using either mirrored columns, connected board columns to show high level information, or dashboards that collect all of that information into one space to show it for that high level. And if you have multiple, for example, you have multiple items with like multiple tasks that you want to roll up to one board, we would really recommend the Roll Up Multiple Boards app. It is an add-on, but it is super slick. You can find it in the apps marketplace. And we would just really recommend checking that out because it allows you to roll up tasks from the down level without having to link items from the low level to the high level, which is what something like this requires, potentially linking multiple tasks to one item, which it leads to potential human error. So that this way there's no human error. It's really slick. So we'd recommend checking that out. Let's briefly talk a little bit more about columns. So as you're going to create your board, or you're trying to figure out what to put in, going to the column center is a great place to start. They have essentials, which honestly really are the most used. Status is a single choice dropdown that's colored. That's really what the status label is. So you can use it for a variety of different things. On the new Monday, they've broken it up into label and priority, but you can make it anything, as you saw me do with Eli's example for teams. You can make it departments, or you can make it tasks even. So it's just that single choice dropdown that's colored. The status label is also the most dynamic label in Monday for notifications, which we'll talk a little bit about later. The people column is how we assign people. It's a drop down for people. It's also dynamic for notifications, so very important. We've got two date columns, timeline and date. I would recommend that you choose just one on your system for your team. And I'll show you that in just a moment, deciding, do we want due date or do we want a timeline that shows the start and the end, and choosing just one of those to help your team decide when the task is supposed to be due, as opposed to having multiple. Again, the more you have, the more confusing it can be for people. Text is, as you would think, text. Long text allows you to enter So you can put bullet points and things. It's not dynamic, however, it's just, a good place for static information. And then these two are just not something we're going to get into right now, but they allow you to relate boards one to another. And these super useful ones, I would say on the whole, the ones that are most used from here that I would really recommend is the files column. The files column allows you to link to add files from your local computer and to add files from some sort of, document management system, such as Dropbox, SharePoint, Box, Google Drive. So the files column is very helpful. And I think it's slightly more helpful than the link column because you can only link one item to the link column, whereas the files column, you can have multiple links and files in there, which may be helpful for you and your team. And then if you want to check out some of these other, they may be useful to you, but we find that really the featured and the essentials are your biggest ones. Some others that you might consider, the formula column, if you need that, time tracking, which you've seen, and dependency are some other ones that are really popular that you could potentially explore. That's where I would start with columns. So it may be the best to start by adding a template and seeing how they're using columns, or going to that column center and kind of figuring out what it is that you need.